Squid Game is an exhilarating, heart-wrenching K-drama about the psychological effects of poverty. In this sick dystopian world, the mega-wealthy host a twisted game show, where the poor compete against each other. A slew of economically disenfranchised people play easy children's games, but there's a catch. One wrong move guarantees death. If we combine Saw and Fall Guys, then this TV show is the result. One lucky contestant will receive a cute piggy bank filled with an unfathomable amount of blood money. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, I'd highly recommend you watch it. Psychology is everywhere in this show. The enemies wear uniforms that distance themselves from culpability and maintain anonymity. People are so desperate to get out of their conditions, they will risk their lives and kill those they love. Squid Game itself emulates the psychological and physical conditions of poverty. A lack of access to meaningful resources, no protection in times of adversity. Dealing with the fact that your life or valuables could be stripped from you in an instant. We get to see as audience members how stress and a person's environment impact their psychology. Some crack under the pressure, while others find a way to cling to life. Watching this show can be super uncomfortable and disturbing at times, but this is by design. Our mental health is affected in a similar way to the characters. We feel comparable sadness or anger to the people in Squid Game. Anyone who's seen episode 6 knows what I'm talking about. So today, I wanted to break down the psychology in Squid Game. I'm Very. If you enjoyed this video, like and share with your friends. Also, don't forget to hit that sub button and notification bell so you always see my latest content. Our environment can change our bodies and mental health. Economic anxiety is something that most of us deal with. But for those with less fortune, these feelings are different. Money can be the only means of survival depending on which country you live in. Financially destitute people appreciate money more than the rich because it has more material value to them. Think about how bored Ilnam is because of his excessive wealth. He has everything but perspective. Those with less can become zealous in their pursuit of money because it's the only means of escape. Any burst in finances can cause gambling addictions and frivolously spending money. It's been so long since I've had something good to eat. How about we go out for dinner tonight? The main character suffers from these very problems because of his socioeconomic conditions. When he bets on horses, you can see the desperation in his eyes. This bet isn't a game to him. Gi-hoon plays for survival, not leisure. He wants so badly to get ahead in life. When the kid wins the toy for him, he doesn't even care what the item is because he's finally won something. But how do these conditions impact our bodies and mental well-being? For starters, inadequate nutrition can lead to a slew of negative health consequences. An increased risk for depression and anxiety disorders. Intense negative emotional reactions to stress. Constant lethargy and exhaustion that's impossible to shake. When we feel this way, many of us fortunate enough can go visit a doctor, but medical aid isn't dispersed equally. Many without money have to face life-threatening diseases and afflictions with no help. All these factors can negatively impact a person's mental health as well. One of the most depressing things about poverty is that it's cyclical. These negative physical effects reinforce the negative view of oneself. A sense of inadequacy or failure can be common feelings. All these factors can make someone spiral downwards psychologically. The only real way for a contestant to fix these issues is to escape. Squid Game is so cruel and vindictive because it capitalizes on the less fortunate's biggest desire. Money isn't just money to the people in this game. It's a means of survival. Squid Game's environment is actually strikingly similar to the conditions of poverty. The contestants are given minimal amounts of food and water, barely enough to survive, let alone compete in this sick competition. Some players don't get access to supplies at all, which is the same for those who live in poverty. Players also don't get medical aid or treatment if they need it. In the crushing scene, when Kong Se-byok is murdered, for a moment, we feel like the main character. They open the doors. Maybe things will be different. But in this game, there is no medical salvation. Contestants are essentially on their own, although in a slightly different venue. Another way the competition emulates real life is when meaningful intervention doesn't happen. The night raid is a perfect example. When we have an issue, we might call the police, but this sometimes vital resource isn't accessed equally. Those who don't have phones or police stations nearby have to protect themselves from bodily harm. So far, we've went over the physical conditions that emulate poverty. Now let's take a look at the psychological ones. Players in this game have to deal with inordinate amounts of stress and pain compared to the average person. Besides a shortage of supplies, they have to deal with losing those they care about. another experience that is more common for those with less than ideal circumstances. In this place, we don't know who we can trust. Even members of the same team have a vested interest to betray one another. One of the most powerful things about Squid Game is what it shows us, the audience. We get to see a microcosm of the lived experiences of those who have difficult financial struggles. When we see a homeless person, we might not think about how they got here. But in this series, we are shown how our environment directly impacts our body and psychology. This is such a powerful thing to highlight in media because it can humanize the less fortunate. Most of the players are average working class people who've fallen on hard times. Any one of us could just as easily get into a similar situation. There's a concept in psychology that the Squid Game actively combats throughout the series. The fundamental attribution error is a tendency for people to overemphasize personality-based explanations for others, but context-based excuses for our own behavior. For example, that person is homeless because they are lazy or an addict. What about me? Why am I homeless? No. It's not the same. I lost my job because of budget cuts and got kicked out. Life has been so hard. When we assume for others and make excuses for ourselves, in a way, we are trying to distance ourselves from the idea that we could just as easily get into a similar predicament. Viewing life in this way can sometimes foster a callous mindset when thinking about poor people, which can drastically further income inequality and poverty. Squid Game combats this notion by taking you every step of the way. When a player does something horrible, we can't assume, because we've seen their circumstances. We know how fucked these people's lived experiences are. I love that the show does this, because it teaches us to be empathetic and conscientious of our surroundings. Understanding and empathy lead to activism to help empower the less fortunate, instead of disregarding them. Why do the soldiers in Squid Games wear masks, and why is there such a rigid hierarchy? These two questions can be answered using psychology. Masks can be a way to augment or change our appearance, although they can also be used to psychologically distance ourselves from accountability. Squid Game is absolutely brutal. All these soldiers can callously shoot down people begging to have another chance, yet without fail, they always pull the trigger. We might assume that the enemies are hand-selected evil, but masks are doing so much of the heavy lifting. When we put on something that covers our face, the person who is being shot can't see who we are. No one can hold us accountable individually. Who knows if I shot this person or someone else? While this doesn't sound like much on paper, real-life historical examples can exemplify the outcomes of these practices. The Nazis used very similar tactics during the Holocaust. They hid behind the shield of collective bigotry. Nazi outforms and iconography made individuals feel less personally accountable. In Squid Game, a soldier getting unmasked demonstrates what I mean. The contestant that flees is insistent that the guard takes off his disguise. At this moment, he is making this person take responsibility for their actions. Even though he's unmasked, he displays no remorse. This is where the second factor I mentioned earlier comes in: hierarchies. Power structures are a necessary component of complete psychological control. The soldiers in Squid Game must follow strict procedures. Every waking moment, they are kept busy, not allowed to speak unless spoken to by a commanding officer. When someone is worked to the bone and constantly busy, they have no time to question their circumstances. Soldiers are also never alone besides being in their rooms. Having no freedom and limited rights can make people feel dehumanized. Humans are social creatures, and being deprived of all socializing can destroy our mental health. That devastation is exactly what the people in power want. The soldiers have no way to collectivize and no social resources to rely on. When a square gives an order, a triangle better listen, or else. In psychology, they've done experiments to test this exact phenomenon. The Milgram experiment aimed to see how much pain someone is willing to inflict onto another under instruction. They set up a fake electrocution machine that supposedly zaps another person. A supervisor comes in and tells the participant to shock this person if they answer questions wrong. A recording then gives a reaction that sounds like someone's getting hurt. They beg the subject not to electrocute them anymore.
Get me out of here! You can't hold me here! Get me out! Get me out of here!
Continue. The next word is green, please.
The important thing to remember is that there are no consequences for not pressing the button. The subject can stop whenever they please with no negative ramifications. Although, a vast majority of participants shock to the highest percentile. When asked to give their reasoning, many participants remove themselves, saying someone instructed them to. even in a non-hostile environment, light instruction is enough for most people to inflict great harm onto another. I'm not saying we have to sympathize with the soldiers, but to understand that they are under control just like the players. Masks and hierarchies in tandem allow the people in charge to elicit unilateral control over them. That's why, even though the man was unmasked, he was unfazed, because he knows he can pawn off accountability to the higher-ups. I'm not doing this. Someone made me. There are also historical instances for the complications of assigning accountability as well. The Nuremberg trials were held to try and hold the Nazis accountable. We might assume every Nazi got the fullest punishment possible, but this wasn't the case. In fact, in the initial and subsequent trials, many high-ranking officials and diplomats in the Nazi party were acquitted, although they all participated in horrendous evils. Assigning accountability is extremely difficult. So many factors go into why a person does something. Many were afraid of death or eternal imprisonment. Some genuinely hated Jewish people. Recognizing these distinctions is crucial when having conversations about accountability. Thousands were executed for disobeying, so the threat of death was very real, similar to the environment that the guards are in Squid Game. When we understand the organization's actions through a psychological framework, we get a better understanding of some of the decisions made by those in charge. In-ho kills anyone who gets unmasked. He does this on purpose. Unmasking oneself breaks anonymity, creates accountability, and destabilizes the existing hierarchy. If other soldiers start to feel responsible or that they could be personally identifiable, they may panic or revolt. If we were in these exact same conditions, we might psychologically distance ourselves from responsibility in a similar fashion. Squid Game's dissection of accountability is so powerful. At first, things seem black and white, but upon further inspection, we find more nuance. There's a theory by Heavy Spoilers I highly recommend you check out. The theory essentially states that the person who recruits people determines whether you're a player or a soldier. I think this theory is 100% accurate. I thought the same thing on my first viewing as well. Here are a few things I noticed when watching. The people in charge don't care if they lose soldiers. Guards are harvesting dead contestants to make money on the side. Something as simple as being unmasked means death. We also see how callous and apathetic the soldiers are to other soldiers dying. Another piece of evidence is the incompetency of the guards. If these people were trained killers, so many mishaps would have been avoided. Although, all this evidence seems to agree with the theory in the Heavy Spoilers video. So if we assume for a second this theory is true, then the soldiers are also victims. They are crammed into shitty conditions, isolated from those they care about. Plus, they are forced to commit horrendous atrocities under the threat of death. Imagine waking up every morning, talking to no one, murdering defenseless people. After enduring all of this, you go back to your plain room and eat a lackluster meal alone. Then rinse and repeat. If we view the story through this framework, conversations about accountability become tricky. These people are being psychologically tortured day in and day out. They don't seem to have any capabilities to rebel. I don't think most of us interpret the contestants as evil people, rather that they do horrible shit to survive. Although, we aren't as quick to extend that charitability to the enemies. Bong Joon-ho's character conveys to us firsthand what it feels like to live this way. He looks tired and scared, throughout the majority of his time acting like a soldier. I think it's safe to say that others in his position feel a similar way. At night, you can hear muffled sounds when he's typing on his phone. Initially, I thought this person was coughing, but my girlfriend said that it sounded like someone crying. His next door neighbor seems like he's onto him somewhat, but it seems like he never speaks out. Maybe he feels so guilty for everything he's done that he decides to not rat him out to the front man. Squid Game hits us again with that deep social commentary. I love that the undercover cop plays this role, because we can see how it affects others through his character. We assume that the soldiers are pure evil, but just like with the financially destitute people, context is everything. Everyone that completed this series remembers Ganbu, but what makes this episode so good? Death is a powerful thing in life and in the content we consume. When a character we love or resonate with dies, their death can be a genuinely triggering experience. Part of this stress comes from the unexpected nature of loss. No one predicted the Red Wedding. But what if we took the normal depiction of death and flipped it? Instead of being shocked by death, we know when and where it's coming from. Rather than kill an enemy, you have to kill your spouse or close friend. Setting the premise up in this way psychologically crushes both the players and the audience. Let's start with the contestants. Through all these traumatic experiences, they learn to care about one another. In many instances, their survival is contingent on each other. That's what makes Ganbu hurt so much. These aren't just strangers anymore. They are friends and family. Gi-hoon is crushed to have to say goodbye to his closest buddy in the game. Hong Se-byuk finally breaks down when she loses someone who acted completely selflessly. This episode crushed me. I was sobbing for the entire last half of the show. Many people report having a similar experience to mine, which is another instance of the writers being intentionally cruel. Squid Game creates an out-of-body experience for the audience members as well. Putting death on a timer makes us begin the grieving process before anyone even passes away. Right after the game is announced, a looming sadness hits us. We all knew they have to die, but not like this. Losing a close friend or loved one makes us empathize with the characters in the show. We process our own grief just like the contestants. Saying goodbye to our Ganbu hurts so much because we've gone through the entire journey with him. Squid Game's soundtrack and sound design are everything. Every moment in this series is elevated by a killer track that perfectly sets the mood. Way Back When is this methodical sounding children's tune that's very goofy and over the top, almost like a song from Yoshi's Woolly World, which is thematically perfect for Squid Game. All the challenges in the competition are kids' games, so making a more cynical sounding children's tune helps make the world feel more cohesive. Then we have The Rope is Tied. This song, combined with the old man's speech and the choreograph, elevated the tug-of-war episode to new heights. To me, this is my favorite episode, but let me know yours down in the comments. What makes this one so great is that it's very simple. The track carries so much weight and intensity to it, but it's mostly drums and percussion. Even the melody goes back and forth, emulating the sensation of playing tug-of-war. Pink Soldiers is one of the best TV compositions of all time in my opinion. This track is drama. There's something so cacophonous and cerebral about this tune that perfectly encapsulates the evil nature of Squid Game. Listening to this track, it's hard not to feel a little uncomfortable. The voices in the song almost sound like they are screaming. We almost forget who we are listening to it, but luckily, I remember my name. Ganbu was made by this song. Where most of the pieces so far have an underlying intensity to them, this one is completely melancholic. Just by listening, we know the only thing ahead of us is tragedy. We feel the hurt that Ollie does, knowing he's been betrayed. Even the higher notes still have a sting to them, telling us, this is it. Goodbye, Ganbu. Then comes the sound design. So much tension is created from the noises in this show. The night raid was horrifying because we couldn't see very much, but we could hear everything. The horrifying sounds of people screaming out in pain and agony. Or during the competition, loud gunshots and shouting sell how terrifying this game really is. Sound is also important for the players. Red light, green light relies almost entirely on listening for when the music's going to stop. Even some of the tensest scenes rely on ambient noise. When two old friends battle, we only hear the sounds of rain and music. Using sound design and music in this way creates a completely immersive experience. One of the most poignant things about Squid Game is the social commentary. This show illustrates how overwhelming life can be when you're up against the wall, when you have no way to pay your mom's medical bills, not enough money to feed your family, struggling to survive. This series embodies the lived experiences of so many. Ilnom's commentary in particular highlights a very real problem in society. So many of us are apathetic towards those with less fortune. When Gi-hoon wins the bet against Ilnom, the person they wager on gets help, which is really inspiring. But a sad reality is that many don't receive the help they need. These are serious problems that need addressing. The media we consume can spread awareness in powerful ways. Squid Game highlights the harsh reality that many face around the world. South Korea in particular has had a lot of economic instability. The poverty rate is high, especially for the elderly. Many don't have meaningful access to healthcare or education. Mainstream content can often depict sentiments present in our own culture at certain points in time. Given the financial issues in South Korea, it makes sense why a series like Squid Game was created. The contestants' feelings are similar to many in real life. In my opinion, episode 2 of the series is the saddest in the show. These people just saw hundreds slaughtered right before their eyes. Yet playing that game isn't as bad as living in poverty. The socioeconomic problems in South Korea are represented in their media. The movie Parasite is another good example of an art piece that highlights the class struggles of their citizens. Squid Games' commentary around these issues illuminates the financial struggles that many face. By consuming this content, we can get a better understanding of how apathy can perpetuate these problems. Recognizing the psychological harms of poverty allows us to better help those in need. Thanks for checking out this video. I really appreciate it. I always stress the educational value of the media we consume. Squid Game is a psychological masterpiece that can show us how much poverty impacts our mental health. Also, how hierarchical structures and masks can make us feel psychologically insulated from taking accountability. Not to mention, the show depicts the lived conditions for many in South Korea. All these elements in tandem elevate this series to new heights. We need more shows like this that combine psychology and sociology to create a dystopian experience like no other. Let me know down in the comments, what did watching Squid Game do to your mental health?